Hello, 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 hello. We're going to continue our discussion of Chapter 4, Lesson 2, talking all about the differences in America between rural life and urban life, whether that means you're out there on the farm with your shovel and your wheelbarrow, or whether it means you're going to be in the city living in those skyscrapers or working in a factory. So let's continue that conversation, taking a look at how urban life is different from rural life. And today we're going to talk all about living conditions. And you can see that highlighted here, this concept of living conditions. And the idea of a living condition, it's pretty simple. And what we're talking about here really is when we say living conditions, it's really the quality of where you live. Is it a nice house? Is it an apartment? Is it a mansion? And the services that are available to you. And what we're going to be taking a look at here today, specifically as we kind of go through this, is how is the quality of life, primarily in this lesson anyway, in cities controlled by bosses and political machines. So our focus today is going to be on urban life, and it's going to be on these people that control it. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why it is that you see living conditions controlled by people, and we're going to spend a little time talking about what those living conditions were themselves. And it's worth noting, I think it's worth doing that, because take a look here at U.S. urban and rural population over the last 110 years. And what you can see is that here, at least in the very beginning of the 1900s, there were more people living in the countryside, in rural areas of America, towns and farms and the middle of nowhere, than there were living in cities and urban areas, right? And that's what you need to take away from this, right? That urban is city, okay, and that rural is country or farm. But that as time passes, and certainly within the time frame that we're talking about here, leading up to about 1914, give or take, a little bit less than that, the number of Americans that are living in cities will outpace those living in rural areas, tremendously so. If the 20th century has been anything when it comes to population patterns, it's the number of people living within cities as compared to the country. So we want to take a look at what living conditions were like for people in these cities and who controlled those living conditions. So we're going to start by taking a look at how most Americans at this point in time are moving to cities. New York is always the example that people will turn to when they look at this, and it grew by 3.5 million people in 40 years. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, well, that's not too crazy, right? 38.5 million people in 40 years, given the number of people that live there now, like 9 million or something. But it's actually a pretty complex growth, and it creates a lot of different challenges, because in 1790, there was only 5% of our population living in cities. That's a really, 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 really tiny component of our population living in those cities. But by 1790, the number of people that were living in these cities, the number was dramatically, or by 1870 rather, the number was dramatically higher. It was 26%. So in less than 100 years, you're seeing an incredible growth in urban population. So why does that matter, right? Because you have to do something with these people. Just think about it. Where do these people live? These millions of people that are coming in. There's no houses for them. There's no apartments for them. Those things don't just magically appear. And what about the infrastructure for all of these millions that are arriving in an incredibly short period of time? You know, from the perspective of someone who's 14, 15, 40 years is a really freaking long time. But from the perspective of somebody who's 40, that's not even a lifetime. That's half a life. I mean, you're talking within the lifespan of just half a lifespan of just one person. 3.5 million people move into your neighborhood. Well, what do you do with them? Like the sewage, the hospitals, the teachers, the education, the electricity, trash, even roads and transportation. Where and how do you get all of these things in place to meet the demand of all of these people showing up? And importantly, whenever it comes to the houses, the roads, the food, whatever it is, who's paying for this? Is it the taxpayers? Is it the city themselves? Is it the state the city's in? Is it the federal government? I mean, all of these things, they're serious questions. And when you have so much growth happening so fast, one of the things you're going to see for sure in America is going to be corruption take place. And we'll get to that. But why do these people move to cities anyway, right? What's the point of moving to a city anyhow? And the answer there, at least in terms of that we need to worry about anyway, is that there's better jobs here, that there are opportunities for better pay in cities, and that there, and if you make enough money, right, and you do well enough, there are things like electricity and plumbing and entertainment. These are, kind of attractive, and there are things growing up in cities that you begin to see to help people accommodate this mass influx, right? This question of where do they live and who pays for it that we had shown you here before. Well, one of the ways that we deal with that is by building up, right? By building up, not out. By introducing the concept of a skyscraper in the 1870s and 1880s. That we're going to be able to take people from their small little village in the middle of nowhere, and we're going to be able to put them into a big city like this. And if you think I'm crazy or that I'm kind of making this up, I'm not. This is a Russian village where many of these immigrants from Eastern Europe were coming. From just this kind of place, a small little village, farming really the only kind of career open to you. Maybe electricity if you're lucky, but probably not really. Yeah, one-story shacks, right? You're talking about that kind of an existence to this kind of an existence. That's insane. But it gives you an understanding of why people might want to come, right? Because they were looking at all of these things that would be better in their lives, whether it's pay, amenities. Wait, what's that word called again? These things that you live there and how you live there? That's right. They're living conditions. People are coming for those better living conditions. And I got to tell you, the living conditions as better, they're not all they're cracked up to be. I don't want you to think that this kind of the